This is a fantastic win for Ukraine. The EU has agreed, after Orban backed down when he was threatening to veto it before, if they didn't release the funds that the EU is holding and preventing Hungary from taking due to its violations of EU laws and regulations, for example, like the misuse of EU funds for corrupt projects. He wanted those funds to be let go. Now that didn't happen, and that didn't happen with the other deal, EU accession, as well, according to the courts, even though they did let go of 10 billion, but they say that was separate. That was a separate deal with them doing judicial reform. There is some MPs calling for an investigation. Either way, he didn't block it for getting his aid released, but his other request, which was, hey, I want this aid to Ukraine to be reviewed every year. That was Viktor Orban's request. And that was the request I was saying they shouldn't agree to it. And the European officials were saying they didn't want to agree to it for two reasons. Number one, it defeats a lot of the purpose of the deal in the first place. The deal was meant to show to Ukraine that long-term stability in the European support for Ukraine is here. Europe is not going to abandon them. That before, after the Budapest Memorandum, that isn't going to happen again. In 2014, that's not going to repeat this time. They're with them for as long as it takes, quote unquote. But if you make it so you can review and then revoke that aid literally every year, it doesn't sound like you're planning into the future. It sounds like you're ready to cut ship anytime necessary, anytime it gets too aggressive, anytime that, oh, you know what, maybe this is not worth it anymore. So the EU and Viktor Orban fought over it, and they came to a compromise. And the compromise was, and I don't like that they came to a compromise, but of course it's better than every year, but I'd rather this not even exist in the first place. The compromise is that they're going to review the $54 billion in EU funds after every 2 years. And this goes up to 2027, so they're only going to have, I think, one review. So they're going to review it once in 2 years from now. It's better than what Orban wanted. It's worse than what the EU officials were asking for. But I think the only reason they were able to even get this compromise in the first place was because the EU came out and they blatantly said, and it was good for them to do it, that if Orban didn't back down, then they would box out the Hungarians, box out the Hungarian economy, and they would take advantage of their economic weak points and make them feel the pain. If the EU is having Viktor Orban undermine their national security priorities and try to leverage aid in order for him to maneuver around and dodge consequences for rule of law violations, then why shouldn't the Europeans in response say, fine, you want to play hardball? Let's play hardball. You want to target our national security? You want to make it so you're leveraging this national security issue to try to get around the rules? Then okay, fine. We're going to operate outside of the rules. This is what we're going to do. We're going to target weak spots in the economy. We're going to say clearly that no EU funds are going to be going to Hungary, and that's going to knock out investor confidence. And once investor confidence is knocked out, that's going to hurt the Hungarian economy, which also already has a high debt ratio and many economic problems that is being subsidized by the European Union to keep them afloat, to keep Viktor Orban's economy afloat and his corruption afloat. And so I think it was that threat, which the Hungarians did not react positively to, that was able to at least partially nudge him. Now, I wish that they maybe leveraged the threat more to make it so there wouldn't have to be any compromise. But then from Viktor Orban's perspective, if he just walked from the EU with his tail between his legs, that would be particularly politically humiliating. So this might have been a tool for Viktor Orban to try to save his political career, and they gave him an off-ramp, quote unquote. Either way, the $54 billion in aid to Ukraine up to 2027 has been approved. In the first tranche of aid, it's going to be $18 billion for 2024. Then they're going to get some more billions for 2025, then 2026, 2027. But the first tranche for this year is going to be $18 billion, and it's going to help account for the shortfalls in the Ukrainian economy that have been diverted to the war effort. Because 64% of the Ukrainian budget goes towards the war. That's up from 40% of the Ukrainian budget last year. So the Ukrainians are putting everything they can, just about, into the war budget. And what this was supposed to do is help supplement the rest of their budget so they can afford to do that. Because right now, teachers and other public staff are dealing with, a lack of overtime, dealing with the lack of pay. I know instances from talking to teachers and from reading reports where teachers are being told that you cannot take, not only can you not take overtime, but you need to take vacation days now. Because if you don't take vacation days now, we're not going to have the money to pay you for all those days, and we're going to have to shut down the school, and then nobody in the village gets to go to school. That's a terrible situation. That's awful. And that's the type of situation that can start to break down your society, have ripple effects down the way. And if they're going to integrate into Europe, the Europeans are obviously concerned about such things. If you want to integrate Ukraine into the European economy, you want a well-educated workforce. You want a healthy society that takes care of its people's needs. Rebuilding is already going to be hard enough. If their youth is uneducated during the rebuilding process, it's only going to make it that much harder. They need to educate the next generation of Ukrainians who are going to help rebuild and make the future of Ukraine. So I think that this investment is worthwhile from the EU, and it allows the Ukrainians to focus more on the war fighting. So I think it's good, and it's guaranteed up until at least 2026, when they're going to have a revote for the rest of the aid for 2026 and 2027. So for at least the next 2 years before Viktor Orban's going to get another chance to do a hostage situation over the aid, Ukraine has gotten the EU aid, has gotten the budget. So this is good. Now, that doesn't mean this is it. Let me be clear. This is not it. This is going to keep going because there's another package that needs to be approved as well. And that's $20 billion from the EU and a defense fund. And this defense fund would also go 4 years into the future, dropping $5 billion every year. Personally, I think it's good, it's helpful, but also I think some people, when talking about it, when they just say the 20 billion number, they say 20 billion in military assistance, just like when they say 54 billion, and some people, not knowing, think that's 50 billion this year, then 50 billion the next year, then 50 billion next year. No. This is 50 billion for years and years and years into the future. This is how the Europeans, despite what Trump says, have actually contributed and promised to contribute more aid to Ukraine. Financially, they have. When it comes to the monetary value of the aid, the Europeans have promised to contribute more. But so I just wanted to clarify that because some people get confused. It's $5 billion every year. It could be more, but it's still helpful, and that's going to be in joint with bilateral aid. For example, Germany approved $8 billion. I can't believe I remember all these numbers now. I'm nerding out about this too much. $8 billion worth of aid for Ukraine this year, which is one of the highest rates of any of Ukraine's allies in Europe. That's much more than the French or the Spanish or the Italians are providing, because they're on the lower end of the spectrum when it comes to supporting Ukraine. They're not pulling their fair share. The French are, at least, we're seeing some effort from the French, a lot less effort from the Italians. Either way, this isn't the end of the EU-Ukraine aid debate, because they're still going to have to now pass that defense fund. And I watched Zelensky's speech after this was approved, and he talked about that. In fact, he made sure to include it because he didn't want to let up the pressure, because, you know, for some people, I see the reaction to Ukraine immediately asking for, well, okay, let's also pass this aid budget. And some people reacted kind of negatively, like, oh, he was so ungrateful. I listened to the speech. We can listen to the speech as well. I thought the speech was very grateful. I thought his government seemed to be very grateful. They put out a lot of very grateful public statements, but they also understand the situation they're in. They're in a situation of national survival. If you were the leader of any country and the people in your villages, in your cities, in your towns were facing their national identity getting wiped off the map and them being conquered and killed, then yeah, I think you would fight tooth and nail every second to get as much as you possibly can, in order to avoid that outcome. So I think, given that circumstance, I thought his ask for more aid was quite mild, definitely considering they've already been engaging in negotiations about that defense package for months now. Either way, we got this approved. I wanted to show you guys this picture. Beautiful. We're just going to sit on this for a moment. You know what? Not only am I going to sit on this for a moment, I'm going to leave this here, and I'm going to annoy the YouTube frogs. I'm going to go get my pipe just so you can look at this beautiful man's sad face. Sad face. I'll be right back. Okay, are we done? You done looking at his sad face? I love this picture. This picture is fantastic. It's beautiful. You know, there was an emoji that God, I sound like I sound demented. There was an emoji I posted with it, and it just, I've never seen an emoji so perfectly describe an emotion before than this one right here. It matches so well. It's the perfect emoji for this face. It is his face exactly. Anyway, afterwards, Donald Tusk, who is the new leader of Poland, who won in the recent elections against the Law and Justice Party, which had been seen as a strong Orban ally, made a speech afterwards. Made a speech after the aid had been approved. Or I think this was actually, no, this is before, no, this was, yeah, no, this was after the aid was, no, I'm looking at the time. This might have been before. Either way, his statements are very interesting, and it shows what I hope indicates Europe's position towards Orban in the future. And I will say one last time, because I keep complimenting the importance of the Polish elections. Donald Tusk being elected was so important for the support for Ukraine and making sure that Orban wouldn't have the leverage necessary in order to undercut Europe's national security priorities and support for Ukraine in order to leverage his avoidance of consequences for his actions. So this guy's election was very important. And his statements on this were probably the most forthright of any of the world leaders who are debating with Orban.
I mean, there's no problem with so-called, Ukraine fatigue, for sure. We have Orban fatigue now here in Brussels.
We have Orban fatigue. My God.
I can't understand, I can't accept this very strange and very egoistic game of Viktor Orban. This is for Viktor Orban to decide if Hungary is a part of our community or not.
Damn.
And this today this position of Viktor Orban, this is a threat for our security. It's something so obvious. And Viktor Orban, in some sense, he's right. If his point of view is, if his position will dominate here in Europe, then Ukraine will lose for sure. But it's not a fact.
But it's not a fatalism. My goodness, man. This is the importance of elections. This is the importance of elections. Anyone who tells you that elections don't matter, they're a liar and they don't have your best interests at heart. Lastly, I do want to show the pivot over to the conversation over in the United States over aid, because now we're talking about the American aid conversation, since, hey, the Europeans just approved the aid package. Not only did they just approve that aid package, now they're negotiating another aid package of $20 billion to Ukraine in military aid over the next 4 years. So not only have they approved this aid package, they're now moving on to the next aid package. And where are we in the United States right now over getting an aid package for Ukraine? The aid package which the Republicans tied to immigration reform, which made many progressive activists uncomfortable, but the Biden administration, knowing the national security priority of what we need to deal with in Europe, went forward with it anyway. They then were able to come to a consensus with Senate Republicans who have been in there for decades, have decades of experience in negotiations and politics in the United States. Mitch McConnell, Lindsey Graham, etc. And then it's sent over to the House, and Trump sinks it. This is the situation we're in right now with the Biden administration. Even though Mike Johnson is telling Baltic state leaders that they're probably going to decouple the aid from an immigration deal, the White House is digging in its heels, saying, no. You asked for an immigration deal. I'm pushing the immigration deal. We are not separating this right now. Personally, whatever gets the Ukraine aid through faster, I think is better. And so if it separates, gets it through, it is what it is. We can hammer them over the head for their hypocrisy. But it could be a position for the Biden administration of, we just spent months and months and months negotiating this. It is at least a concern for voters, at least comes up when it comes to the polling data. So let's get this done. And since you guys asked for it, hey, you guys made the mess, you deal with it. So I think that this is a position of the Biden administration. I understand it. It's a frustrating position to be in. You just spend months negotiating with Senate Republicans, getting compromises from progressives in order to make a deal that they'd be satisfied with in order to get this aid through. And then at the last second, Trump sinks it, not because the deal is bad for the Republican priorities, not because it, of some, legal reason why it couldn't be done, but simply to serve Trump's campaign interests. It's choosing party over country, personality over security. And it's really, really bad. And I'm not the only person who thinks this. Dan Crenshaw, who I know is really hated by the Trump MAGA crowd, he seems to be expressing this concern as well. By the way, and my position is I'm fine with separating from the Ukraine bill and passing it, because there are certain things in there that even I'm uncomfortable with. So I'd be finer with a more moderate immigration reform policy from the Biden administration if they're not willing to try to pass it come election day. If, hopefully, Biden wins.
The height of stupidity is having a strong opinion on something you know nothing about.
Okay, well, he is very low, so let me turn it up. There you go.
I'm extremely disappointed in the very strange maneuvering by many on the right to torpedo a potential border reform bill. If we have a bill that, on net, significantly decreases illegal immigration, and we sabotage that, that is inconsistent with what we told our voters we would do. People will make up whatever reasons they want to. There's a number of them, I'm sure. But it would be a pretty unacceptable dereliction of your duty.
And the question is, where does this go from here? The negotiators in the Senate are still hoping to put out text of this deal as soon as this week. That is what Senator James Lankford told reporters earlier today. And Chris Murphy, one of those three negotiators, said it makes no sense, in his view, for Republicans to walk away from this deal after trying to strike one for months and months and months. But that is exactly what they're weighing right now in the upper echelons of the Senate GOP, saying, what is the point of going forward with this deal if it's going to get killed in the House? Mitch McConnell non-committal about the way forward, even as he supports the underlying elements of this deal.
See, for the Republicans in the Senate, this is a difficult position because they just worked for months to get this done, and it would help them go back to their voters and say, hey, we didn't waste the entirety of our time in Congress. Because right now, if they go back to their people, Chip Roy, and I've heard this from Chip Roy, who's somebody who opposes this deal, by the way, saying that he's angry because he can't go back to his constituents and say they did anything because they've done fucking nothing. All they've done is fight over who the House Speaker should be multiple times. And so, so from their position, that doesn't make any sense. They want to make their voters happy so they can hopefully do better in the midterms. They want to, achieve the Republican policy priority. And they don't want to make all these months of negotiations and commitments that they made while negotiating this. They don't want it to all go to waste. But on the other hand, not only is it possibly true that it might end up hurting Trump, because if Biden can pass some immigration reform, that it might hurt Trump. If he passed more long-lasting immigration reform than Donald Trump did while he was in office, maybe it would. But at the end of the day, even if this bill doesn't solve anything, it does achieve some of the Republican primary priorities. Primary priorities, policy priorities. But if it doesn't help Trump win, then that's something that could give them pause. Now, I think the Senate Republicans are, like Mitch McConnell, Lindsey Graham, are less concerned about particularly that. But I do think they might be more concerned about the idea of signing their name to a project, sending it to the House, having it sunk, and then even hurting the Republicans more because it'll look like the Republicans are a bunch of obstructionist assholes who didn't actually care, because a lot of them are. At least when we're talking about people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, and people could say, oh, those are Republican minorities. But when the Republican House majority is just 2 votes, those small voices become oversized.
Manu, I think I want to put that Dan Crenshaw quote on a pillow, talking about being very exercised about people, even though they don't know anything about it. The height of stupidity is being very opinionated about something you don't know anything about. That's the quote. Love it.
I do also want to show you guys what Trump had to say about the policy in Ukraine. And his answer was as confusing as you would expect it to be, because he's finally elaborating on his position after saying really all his position was, oh, in the first 24 hours, I'm going to find a deal and we're going to end the war. It's nonsense. It's bullshit. He's not going to be able to do that. It sounds like his replacement for Obamacare, which is, trust me, I have a secret plan. And when we replace it, I'll totally show it. And then when he tried to replace Obamacare, what replacement did he have? Nothing. And that's why it failed. Not because the people who voted against it, like John McCain, didn't want a replacement, but because there wasn't a plan to replace it. And so I think it's probably true about the peace deal as well. Unless his plan is quite literally just forcing the Ukrainians to give up land, whether they like it or not. Which, what is he going to do if they just say, screw you then? Are you just going to abandon this American national security priority because they didn't accept your perfect deal that you're going to make up on a fortnight? Anyway, this is what he had to say about American aid to Ukraine. He targeted the fact that he believes the Europeans aren't contributing enough. And he said that on the eve of the EU approving 54 billion in aid to Ukraine and possibly another 20 billion in a defense fund. As in the United States, our aid has been blocked up since October, in part due to him.
And you know, Ukraine's an interesting case. People always want to know my feeling. Number one, we're in for 200 billion plus, and the European nations
We're not in for that.
are in for.
And I mean, even if you were to get to the number that was somewhat close to that, and it's lower than that, you would have to account for every weapon that we shipped over to Ukraine. You would have to account it at its original manufacturing cost. And so that means that the Vietnam era troop carriers made in the 1960s that are worth like 80% less than what they were worth when they were made, because, you know, better systems are available. It's got like 80 to 70 years of 60, 70 years of wear and tear. Been sitting in a storehouse for who knows how long. Yeah, counting those at their original values, I think, is dishonest.
20 billion, and it's more important.
You should count it at the value it has when it was sent over. I think that's fair.
And it's more important for them. And don't you think they should equalize? Nobody asks them. It's like I did with NATO. I said, we're paying for NATO, and we don't get so much out of it.
Reminder that there's reports indicating that Trump told NATO officials and EU officials, European officials, while he was in office, that if Europe was attacked, he would not come to their defense. That, mind you, 45% of the world economy is based in the United States and Europe, and they're our main export market. So, you know, I think that might be disastrous for us, but you do you, boo. I'm sure just dropping all American deterrence will not have negative consequences for millions of people and the United States as well.
And you know, I hate to tell you this about NATO. If we ever needed their help, let's say we were attacked, I don't believe they'd be there.
Not only is this wrong, I mean, this is ahistorical in recent memory. There's only been one time Article 5 was triggered. Only one time Article 5 has been triggered in the entire history of the article. And what Article 5 is an article that any NATO member state can trigger if they were attacked. Let's say Estonia was invaded by the Russians tomorrow. In order to get everybody else to defend them, they would trigger Article 5, and the other nations would join the war. And that's how the collective defense of NATO works. It's centered around Article 5. Article 5 has only been called once in the entire history of it. And that's because, largely, people would point to this as the success of NATO, that the collective deterrence aspect, the fact that you would have to fight all of NATO at once, has deterred other countries from attacking them. But that didn't deter non-state actors, like Al-Qaeda, from attacking the United States in 2001 and 9/11. And it is then that Article 5 was called for the only time it has been called in the entirety of its existence. And after Article 5 was called, we went to Afghanistan and Iraq. The British joined us. The French joined us into Afghanistan. Many other European powers joined us. Many other NATO states joined us, sending over troops, supplies, resources, you name it. We triggered Article 5. The United Kingdom, the rest of them, they came with us. Hell, some of them went into wars that they didn't even need to go into in order to join us. For example, the British joined us in invading Iraq for weapons of mass destruction that didn't exist. Hell, the Ukrainians, who aren't even bound by Article 5, but wanted to be allies with the United States, and especially after we made them give up their nuclear arsenal, they joined us in Iraq and Afghanistan and had their soldiers die in the process. They bled for us. And they're not even covered by Article 5. This is the amount of ignorance this man is working with, and he wants to be president of the United States again. And the fact I have to say again is embarrassing as an American.
I don't believe. I know the people. I know them. I can tell you country by country who would be there and who, but I don't believe that.
Dude, if he could even name half the countries in Europe, I'd be proud of him.
Be there. But I took care of NATO. I said, you got to pay your bills. If you don't pay your bills, we're not going to be there to support you. And the following day, the money came rolling into NATO. But the European nations, if you add them up, the economy is about the same size as the U.S., believe it or not. A lot of people are surprised. You add them all up, and they are in for about $20 billion, and we're in for $200 billion.
This is just a lie. This is just a lie. They're in for more than $20 billion. This is just a flat lie.
Because we're stupid. All we have to do is say pay. Nobody ever says to them pay.
Look, I don't even want to listen to it anymore. Here's the Kill Ukraine support tracker. They're going to update it again on February 16th. So this does not include the $50 billion that was just approved by Europe, but you could see as a percentage of GDP what states provide how much. And you could see states like Norway, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Denmark especially. Denmark have provided billions upon billions, and when you consider their size, that is significant. They're really emptying out basically all of their stockpiles for Ukraine. They're real homies. And then there's Poland, Germany. Like, as a percentage of GDP, the United States is contributing, I mean, less than the Germans and the Poles and the Czechs and the Slovaks. But as a total amount, when it comes to military assistance, that's where we do better, because that's what we have available, because the European defense industry is not up to snuff with the American defense industry. They still have some things that are, powerful, but it's not to the same size. They don't have the same stockpiles that we do. But the idea that, like, we're, like, outpacing, for example, like any of these countries or Denmark or Norway, nah, it's nonsense. Where is the Kiel Institute that just checks out? Oh yeah, here we go. So the first is EU institutions. EU institutions is the #1 government support to Ukraine. Then it's the United States, then it's Germany, then the rest. So that would mean that the EU states contribute to the fund, and then the EU gives money to Ukraine. And then if you go Germany, United Kingdom, all these states here, they also unilaterally, individually give aid to Ukraine. And if you go by a percentage of GDP, let's look. Let's list the numbers as a percentage of GDP that are contributing more than the United States. Lithuania, Estonia, Norway, Denmark, Latvia, Slovakia, Poland, Netherlands, Finland, Czech Republic, Sweden, Bulgaria, Croatia, Germany, Spain, Austria, Greece, Portugal, Slovenia. Was Slovakia on this? By the way, Slovakia is led by Fico, who is against aid to Ukraine, by the way, who has been against aid to Ukraine, and they've contributed more. Bulgaria, Croatia, Germany, Spain, Austria, Greece, Portugal, Slovenia, Belgium, Hungary, Italy. Hungary. Share of EU aid. See, as a share of the, even though Hungary wants to give basically nothing to Ukraine, just because of their share of the EU aid as a percentage of GDP, they are higher because it's 0.6%. Italy, France, Romania, Cyprus, Luxembourg. By the way, they don't have a choice about the percentage of EU aid. They have to contribute to the EU if they want to be part of the EU. Italy, France, Romania, Cyprus, Luxembourg, the United Kingdom, Malta, Ireland, and then the United States. The countries we beat include Canada, Switzerland, Iceland, Japan, Australia, South Korea, New Zealand, Taiwan, and Turkey. So when it comes to Ukraine's allies, as a percentage of GDP, we're actually on the lower end of the spectrum. And that shouldn't be surprising considering we've been tied up since October. I want to see the Kiel Institute, Europe versus America. Here it is. This is from September of last year. Aid commitments to Ukraine across donor groups. Obviously, this has increased since then because of the billions that we just approved, that Europe just approved. But as you can see, man, his painting of the situation is bogus.